Okay, Raven. So I'm going to take a minute to read the book. You chose A Gift of Dragons by Anne McCaffrey. And this is for you too, Kira and Robin and Nilo and Rain and Sage, all of you. Anyone who wants to listen. So we're going to start at the beginning. It's a collection of short stories by Anne McCaffrey, based on her series of Pern, The Dragon Riders of Pern. The Smallest Dragon Boy. Although Kevin lengthened his walking stride as far as his legs would stretch, he couldn't quite keep up with the other candidates. He knew he would be teased again, just as he knew many other things that his foster mother told him he ought not to know. Kevin knew that Bertelli, the most senior of the boys, set that spanking pace just to embarrass him, the smallest dragon boy. Kevin would arrive, tail fork end of the group, breathless, chest heaving, and maybe get a stern look from the instructing wing second. Dragon riders, even if they were still only hopeful candidates for the glowing eggs, which were hardening on the hot sands of the hatching ground cavern, were expected to be punctual and prepared. Sloth was not tolerated by the were leader of Bend and Ware. A good record was especially important now. It was very near hatching time, when the baby dragons would crack their mottled shells and stagger forth to choose their lifetime companions. The very thought of that glorious moment made Kevin's breath catch in his throat. To be chosen, to be a dragon rider, to sit astride the neck of a winged beast with jeweled eyes, to be his friend in telepathic communication with him for life, to be his companion in good times and fighting extremes, to fly effortlessly over the lands of Pern, or thrillingly between, to any point anywhere in the world. Flying between was done on dragonback or not at all, and it was dangerous. Kevin glanced upward, past the black mouths of the were caves in which grown dragons and their chosen riders lived, toward the starstones that crowned the ridge of the old volcano that was Bend and Ware. On the height, the blue watch dragon, his rider mounted on his neck, stretched the great transparent pinions that carried him on the winds of the Pern to fight the evil thread that fell at certain times from the skies. The many-faceted rainbow jewels of his eyes glistened fleetingly in the greenery sun. He folded his great wings to his back, and the watch pair resumed their statue-like pose of alertness. Then the enticing view was obscured as Kevin passed through the hatching ground cavern. The sands underfoot were hot, even through heavy ware-hide boots. How the bootmaker had protested having to sew so small. Kevin was forced to wonder why being small was so reprehensible. People were always calling him babe and shooing him away as being too small or too young for this or that. Kevin was constantly working twice as hard as any other boy his age to prove himself capable. What if his muscles weren't as big as Bertelli's? They were just as hard. And if he couldn't overpower anyone in a wrestling match, he could outdistance everyone in a foot race. Maybe if you run fast enough, Bertelli had jeered on the occasion when Kevin had been goaded to boast of his swiftness. You could catch a dragon. That's the only way you'll make Dragon Rider. You just wait and see, Bertelli. You just wait, Kevin had replied. He would have liked to wipe the contemptuous smile from Bertelli's face, but the guy didn't fight fair, even when a winged second was watching. No one knew what impresses a dragon. Reinhardt, enough! It's 'cause Odin's over. They've got to be able to find you first, babe. Yes, being the smallest candidate was not an enviable position. It was therefore imperative that Kevin impress a dragon in his first hatching. That would wipe the smile off every face in the cavern. And according to him, the respect due any dragon rider, even the smallest one. Besides, no one knew exactly what impressed the baby dragons as they struggled from their shells in search of their lifetime partners. I like to believe that dragons see into a man's heart, Kevin's foster mother Mende had told him. If they find goodness, honesty, a flexible mind, patience, courage, and you've got that in quantity, dear Kevin, that's what dragons look for. I've seen many a well-grown lad left standing in the sands on hatching day in favor of someone not so strong, or tall, or handsome. And if my memory serves me, which it usually did, Mende knew every word of the Harper's tale worth telling, although Kevin did not interrupt her to say so. I don't believe that Flair, our were-leader, was all that tall when the bronze mammoth chose him, and Mammoth was the only bronze dragon of that hatching. Dreams of impressing a bronze dragon were beyond Keevan's boldest reflections, although that goal dominated the thoughts of every other hopeful candidate. The pictures. This is Keevan. It's probably backwards since I have it on the wheelbarrow. Green dragons were small and fast and more numerous. There was more prestige to impressing a blue or a brown than a green. Being practical, Keevan seldom dreamed as high as big fighting brown like Kemp, Fenor's fine fellow, the biggest brown on all Pern. But to fly a bronze? Bronzes were almost as big as the queen, and only they took to the air when the queen flew at mating time. A bronze rider could aspire to become were-leader. Well, Keevan would console himself brown riders could aspire to become winged seconds, and that wasn't bad. He'd even settle for a green dragon. They were small, but so was he. No matter. He simply had to impress a dragon his first time in the hatching ground. Then no one in the were would taunt him any more for being so small. Shells, Keevan thought now. But the sands are hot. Impression time is imminent, candidates, the winged second was saying as everyone crowded respectfully close to him. See the extent of the striations on this promising egg? The stretch marks were larger than yesterday. Everyone leaned forward and nodded thoughtfully. That particular egg was the one Bertelli had marked as his own, and no other candidate dared, on pain of being beaten by Bertelli at his first opportunity to approach it. The egg was marked by a large yellow splotch in the shape of a dragon back-winging to land, talons outstretched to grasp the rock. Everyone knew that bronze eggs bore distinctive marks, and naturally Bertelli, who had been presented at 8 impressions already and was the biggest of the candidates, had chosen him. I'd say that the great opening day is almost upon us, the winged second went on, and then his face assumed a grave expression. As we all know, there are only 40 eggs and 72 candidates. Some of you may be disappointed on the great day. That does not necessarily mean you aren't dragon rider material, just that the dragon for you hasn't been shelled. You'll have other hatchings, and it's no disgrace to be left behind an impression or two, or more. Keevan was positive that the winged second's eyes rested on Bertelli, who'd been stood off at so many impressions already. Keevan tried to squinch down so the winged second wouldn't notice him. Keevan had been reminded too often that he was eligible to be a candidate by only one day. He, of all the hopefuls, was most likely to be left standing in the great day. One of the more reasons he simply had to impress at his first hatching. Now move about among the eggs, the winged second said. Touch them. We don't know what it does any good, but it certainly doesn't do any harm. Some of the boys laughed nervously, but everyone immediately began to circulate among the eggs. Bertelli stepped up officiously to his egg, daring anyone to come near it. Keevan smiled, because he had already touched it. Every inspection day when the others were leaving the hatching ground and no one could see him crouch to stroke it. Keevan had an egg he concentrated on, too. One drawn slightly on the far side of the others. The shell had a soft greenish-blue tinge with a faint creamy swirl design. The consensus was that this egg contained a mere green, so Keevan was rarely bothered by rivals. He was somewhat perturbed, then, to see Bertelli wandering over to him. I don't know why you're allowed in this impression, Keevan. There are enough of us without a babe, Bertelli said, shaking his head. I'm of age. Keevan kept his voice level, telling himself not to be bothered by mere words. Yeah, Bertelli made a show of standing on his tiptoes. You can't even see over an egg. Hatching day, you'd better get in front of or the dragons won't see you at all. Of course, you could get run down that way in the mad scramble. Oh, I forgot. You can run fast, can't you? You'd better make sure a dragon sees you this time, Bertelli, Keevan replied. You're almost over age, aren't you? Bertelli flushed and took a step forward, hand half raised. Keevan stood his ground, but if Bertelli advanced one more step, he would call the winged second. No one fought on the hatching ground. Surely Bertelli knew that much. Fortunately, at that moment, the winged second called the boys together and led them from the hatching ground to start on evening chores. There were glows to be replenished, in the main kitchen caverns and sleeping cubicles, the major hallways and the queen's apartments. Firestone stacks had to be filled against threat attack, and black rock brought to the kitchen hearths. The boys fell to their chores, tantalized by the odors of roasting meat. The population of the Ware began to assemble for the evening meal, and the dragon riders came in from feeding ground on their sweep checks. It was the time of day Kevin liked best, once the chores were done but before dinner was served. A fellow could often get close enough to the dragon riders to hear their talk. Tonight, Kevin's father, Kalast, was at the main dragon rider table. It puzzled Kevin how his father, a brown rider and a tall man, could be his father, because he, Kevin, was so small. It obviously puzzled Kalast, too, when he deigned to notice his small son. "In a few more turns, you'll be as tall as I am, or taller." Kalast was pouring Bendon wine all around the table. The dragon riders were relaxing. There'd be no threat attack for 3 more days, and they'd be in the mood to tell tall tales, better than Harper yarns, about impossible maneuvers they'd done. A dragon back, when threat attack was closer, their talk would change to a discussion of tactics, of evasion, of going between, how long to suspend there until the burning but fragile thread would freeze and crack and fall harmlessly off dragon and man. They would dispute the exact moment to feed Firestone to the dragon so he'd have the best flame ready to sear thread mid-air and render it harmless to ground and man below. There was such a lot to know and understand about being a dragon rider that sometimes Kevin was overwhelmed. How would he ever be able to remember everything he ought to know at the right moment? He couldn't dare ask such a question. This would have only given additional weight to the notion that he was too young yet to be a dragon rider. "Having older candidates makes good sense," Lavelle was saying as Kevin settled down near the table. "Why waste 4 to 5 years of a dragon's fighting prime until his rider grows up enough to stand the rigors?" Lavelle had impressed a blue of Ramoth's first clutch. Most of the candidates thought Lavelle was marvelous because he spoke up in front of the older riders, who awed them. "That was well enough in the interval when you didn't need to mount a full Ware complement to fight thread, but not now, not with more eligible candidates than ever. Let the babes wait." "Any boy who is over 12 turns has the right to stand in the hatching ground," Kalast replied, a slight smile on his face. He never argued or got angry. Kevin wished he were more like his father, and oh, how he wished he was a brown rider. "Only a dragon. Each particular dragon knows what he wants in a rider. We certainly can't tell. Time and again, the theorists." Kalast's smile deepened as his eyes swept those at the table. "Are surprised by a dragon's choice. They never seem to make a mistake, however." "Now, Kalast, just look at the roster this impression. 72 boys and only 40 eggs. Drop off the 12 youngest and there's still a good field of hatchlings to choose from. Shells. There are a couple of werelings unable to see over a were egg, much less a dragon, and years before they can ride thread." "True enough. But if the were is scarcely under fighting strength, and if the youngest impress, they'll be old enough to fight when the oldest of our current dragons go between from senility." "Half of the were-bred lads have already been through several impressions," one of the bronze riders said then. "I'd say drop some of them off this time. Give the untried a chance." "There's nothing wrong in presenting a clutch with as wide a choice as possible," said the were leader, who sat with his werewolf. That was terrible. That's a man talking. "There's nothing wrong with presenting a clutch with as wide a choice as possible," said the were leader, who had joined the table with Lessa, the werewoman. "Has there ever been a case," she said, smiling in her odd way at the riders, "where a hatchling didn't choose?" Her suggestion was almost heretical and drew astonished gasps from everyone, including the boys. Hilaire laughed. "You say the most outrageous things, Lessa." "Well, has there ever been a case where a dragon didn't choose?" "Can't say as I recall one," Kalast replied. "Then we continue this tradition," Lessa said firmly, as if that ended the matter. But it didn't. The argument ranged from one table to the other all through dinner. and some favoring out weeding the candidates the most likely, lopping off those who were very young or who had multiple opportunities to impress. All the candidates were in a swivet, though such a departure from tradition would be to the advantage of many. As the evening progressed, more riders were favored and eliminated the youngest and those who'd passed 4 or more impressions unchosen. Kevin felt he could bear such a dictum only if Bertelli were also eliminated, but this seemed less likely than that Kevin would be turfed out, since the ware's need was for fighting dragons and riders. By the time the evening meal was over, no decision had been reached, although the were leader had promised to give the matter due consideration. He might have slept on the problem, but few of the candidates did. Tempers were uncertain in sleeping caverns next morning as the boys were routed out of their beds to carry water and black rock to cover the glows. Twice Mende had to call Kevin to order for clumsiness. "Whatever is the matter with you, boy?" she demanded in exasperation when he tipped black rock short of the bin and suited up the hearth. "They're going to keep me from this impression." "What?" Mende stared at him. "Who?" "You heard them talking at dinner last night. They're going to turf the babes from the hatching." "Mila. Ablasen. Mila." Girl. Good girl. Mende regarded him a moment longer before touching his arm gently. "There's lots of talk around the supper table, Kevin, and it cools as soon as the supper cools. I've heard the same nonsense before every hatching, but nothing is ever changed." "There's always a first time," Kevin answered, copying one of her own phrases. "That'll be enough of that, Kevin. Finish your job. If the clutch does hatch today, we'll need full rock bins for the feast, and you won't be around to do the filling. All my fosterlings make dragon riders." "The first time?" Kevin was bold enough to ask as he scooted off with the rock barrel. Perhaps, Kevin thought later, if he hadn't been on that chore just when Bertelli was also fetching black rock, things might have turned out differently. But he had dutifully trundled the barrel to the outdoor bunker for another load just as Bertelli arrived on a similar errand. "Heard the news, babe?" Bertelli asked. He was grinning from ear to ear, and he put an unnecessary emphasis on the final insulting word. "The eggs are cracking?" Kevin all but dropped the loaded shovel. Several anxieties flickered through his mind then. He was black with rock dust. Sorry. Would he have time to wash before donning the white tunic of candidacy? And if the eggs were hatching, why hadn't the candidates been called by the winged second? "Nah, guess again." Bertelli was much too pleased with himself. With a sinking heart, Kevin knew what the news must be, and he could only stare with intense desolation at the older boy. "Come on, guess, babe." "I've no time for guessing games," Kevin managed to say with indifference. He began to shovel the black rock into the barrel as fast as he could. "I said guess." Bertelli grabbed the shovel. "And I said I have no times for guessing games." Bertelli wrenched the shovel from Kevin's hands. "Guess!" "I'll have that shovel back, Bertelli." Kevin straightened up, but he didn't come to Bertelli's bulky shoulder. From somewhere, other boys appeared, some with barrels, some with mysteriously alerted to the prospect of a confrontation among their numbers. "Babes don't give orders to candidates around here, babe." Someone sniggered, and Kevin, incredulous, knew what he must have been dropped from the candidacy. He yanked the shovel from Bertelli's loosened grasp. Snarling, the older boy tried to regain position, but Kevin clung with all his strength to the handle, dragged back and forth by the stronger boy as the stronger boy jerked the shovel about. With a sudden, unexpected movement, Bertelli rammed the handle into Kevin's chest, knocking him over the barrel handles. Kevin felt a sharp, painful jab behind his left ear, an unbearable pain in his left shin, and then the painless nothingness. Mendy's angry voice roused him and startled, he tried to throw back the covers, thinking he'd overslept. But he couldn't move, so firmly was he tucked into his bed. And then the constriction of the bandage on his head and the dull sickishness in his leg brought back recent occurrences. "Hatching?" he cried. "No, lovely," Mendy said in a kind voice. Her hand was cool and gentle on his forehead. though there's some as won't be at any hatching again. Her voice took on a stern edge. Kevin looked beyond her to see the werewoman who was frowning with irritation. Kevin, will you tell me what occurred at the Black Rock bunker? Asked Lessa in an even voice. He remembered Bertelli now and the quarrel over the shovel and what had Mendy said about some not being at any hatching? Much as he hated Bertelli, he couldn't bring himself to tattle on Bertelli and force him out of candidacy. Come, lad, and a note of impatience crept into the werewoman's voice. I merely want to know what happened from you, too. Mendy said she sent you for Blackrock. Bertelli and every whirling in the cavern seems to have been on the same errand. What happened? Bertelli took my shovel. I had him finished with it. There's more than just one shovel. What did he say to you? He'd heard the news. What news? The werewoman was suddenly amused. That there'd been changes. Is that what he said? Not exactly. What did he say? Come on, lad. I've heard from everyone else you know. Mila! Coleman! Mila! Sorry, I had to go get Mila. He said for me to guess the news. And you fell for that old gag? The werewoman's irritation returned. Consider all the talk last night at supper, Lessa, Mendy said. Of course the boy would think he'd been eliminated. And in fact he is, with a broken skull and leg. Lessa touched his arm in a rare gesture of sympathy. Excuse me. Be that as it may, Kevin. You'll have other impressions. Bertelli will not. There are certain rules that must be observed by all candidates, and his conduct proves him unacceptable to the were. She smiled at Mendy and then left. I'm still a candidate? Kevin asked urgently. Well, you are lovely and you aren't. His foster mother said. Is the numbweed working? She asked, and when he nodded, she said, You just rest. I'll bring you some nice broth. At any other time in his life, Kevin would have relished such cosseting, but he just lay there worrying. Bertelli had been dismissed. Would the others think it was his fault? But everyone was there. Bertelli provoked that fight. His worry increased, but although he heard excited comings and goings in the passageway, no one tweaked back the curtain across the sleeping alcove he shared with 5 other boys. Surely one of them would have come in sometime. No. They were all avoiding him. And something else was wrong. Only he didn't know what. Mendy returned with broth and beechberry bread. Why doesn't anyone come see me, Mendy? I haven't done anything wrong, have I? I didn't ask to have Bertelli turfed out. Mila. A blassin'. Mendy soothed him, saying everyone was busy with noontime chores and no one was angry with him. They were giving him a chance to rest in quiet. The numbweed made him drowsy, and her words were fair enough. He permitted his fears to dissipate until he heard a hum. Actually, he felt it first, in the broken shin bone and his sore head.